Hi, how are you doing? My name is Rachel. I'm the sewing pattern designer here at Cuddly Patterns, and I've made this video tutorial to show you every step of how to sew my easy teddy bear, Elsie Bear, and the link to buy the pattern is below in the description. So, Elsie Bear is an easy to sew teddy bear. The reason she's easy is because she has less seams than my best-selling Betsy Bear or Charlie Bear. So her face is just two pieces with a central seam. There isn't a forehead or a muzzle to negotiate around as there is with Betsy or Charlie. Her arms are sewn into the neck seam, so there's no arm jointing to negotiate around. She has a 3-part body, so that eliminates another seam down the centre. When you put her legs onto her body, there is a circular area to attach the two. There are markings on the tops, bottoms and sides of those, so it's really easy to see which way around you've got your legs. And also on these legs, on the edges of the leg pieces, there are further markings so you can easily line up the outer and the inner legs. On the paws, there are marks on the side, so again you can just pop those paw pads on more easily. It all lines up, and just put your pins in between your markings. And I haven't put a mouth on her, so that's one less area of stitching. You can of course add a mouth if you want to. It's your choice. It's going to be your teddy bear. So I really hope this video tutorial helps you, and let's begin. You might notice that the pattern pieces in the video say Cushion Bloom 24 for the copyright, and the pieces that you'll receive in your pattern say copyright Rachel Leggett 2024. So I'm right in the middle of changing my business name. My name is Rachel Leggett. My business is now rebranding to Cuddly Patterns, so that's why there's that discrepancy, but it is entirely the same pattern, okay? And just to let you know a little bit of background, Cwtch is a Welsh word and it means a hug, but it's not just a quick sort of social quick squeeze. It's a safe place. It's a real embrace, and for me it sums up the whole spirit of what a memory bear is. So before I start the video tutorial, I just want to talk to you about interfacing. So interfacing is really important for memory bear making. So what it does is it stops your fabric from stretching out of place when you put your stuffing in. It stops your fabric from looking wrinkled or puckered, and if you've got maybe an older fabric that you're using, something that's quite delicate, it will stop it from ripping, and it will just give it a bit of structure and solidity. So it won't make your bear stiff, but it helps the fabric to hold the shape of the bear, and it really does improve the appearance of your bear as well. So I've put a link below to the interfacing that I use, but you are looking for, when you look for your interfacing, one that's got these 3 properties. So it needs to be medium weight, it needs to be woven, and it needs to be iron-on. So just check as well as those 3 properties. If you get a sample of interfacing, you're just looking at it, you want to be sure that it's right. You want one that's got so many glue dots on the back that you can't see the spaces in between them. The back of the interfacing is covered in hundreds of glue dots, but the more glue dots there are and the more tightly packed they are, the better quality it is, and it will adhere much better to your fabric when you heat it with your iron. The other side of the interfacing then is of cotton, and the way that I use my interfacing and the way that I'll show you in this tutorial is I draw around my pattern pieces onto the cotton side of the interfacing, and then once I've done that, I will then iron that interfacing onto my fabric, onto the back of my fabric that I'm using, and then I'll cut the 2 out together. So let's begin. When you first print your pattern off, you'll see that on the page that's got the arm and the face, there's also 2 scales at the top. There's one for if you're using metric, so there's a 5 centimetre scale, and there's one for if you're using imperial, there's a 1-inch scale here. Once you've just checked that your pattern is printed off correctly, the next thing to do is for each of your pattern pieces, cut around the solid dark line that's around each piece. There we are, and then stick them onto a thin cardboard. Now I've used pizza box because it is solid but also thin enough that you can easily cut around the curves. Cereal cardboard is a really similar type of card. When you look at your pattern pieces for the leg and the body, you'll see what looks like a target picture on each one. So these are then marked to say 12, 3, 6 and 9. So they tally with 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock on the clock. If you are going to make your bear with the leg sewn in a standing position, or with the leg sewn in a sitting position, you need to cut out the circle here, cut out the circle here. If you're making it jointed, I would show you that in a different video. So just basically for the leg and the body, as with the other pattern pieces, cut around the solid line around the edge of the pieces, also cut around the circle here, and then stick them onto cardboard. Once your pattern pieces are cut out and stuck onto cardboard, the next thing to do is to draw around them onto your interfacing. Your interfacing has got two different textures. The one side is bumpy where the glue dots are, the other side is smooth, and you want to be drawing on the smooth side. So if you put your pattern pieces one at a time onto the interfacing, follow the directions on them. So this is the face. It says cut 2, 1 reversed. And there's also a little mark here that says DC and a little mark here that says D. You're going to ignore for now this dashed line. I'll tell you about that later in the pattern. So just draw around your pattern piece once. There we are. Make sure you've drawn right into the corners so it's easy to cut out. You can see what shape you've got. I'm going to put a little line here by C, a little line here by D, and I'm also just going to put my pen through there because that's the eye hole. So just check that the eye hole is okay. It is, just make it a little bit darker there. And I'm just going to put a line here and a line here, and that's just transferred these two markings onto my interfacing piece. So that's one piece of face prepped, but it says cut 2, 1 reversed. So that means you need to turn it over, lay it back down again, draw around it again, and then along the bottom, do the eye hole, again darken it. I just want to make sure I've got these lines as well. So that's the line there for C, and then the line there for D as well. Oops. There we are. So that is the face interfacing prepped. The next thing you'll need to know about when you are prepping your interfacing is what to do about the body and what to do about the legs, because they've got the holes in. So for your body piece, you would do exactly like you just did for your face. You'll draw all the way around it. You'll draw around the hole here as well. You're going to do a line here where it says U, a line where it says L, and a line where it says M. And you also want to mark the 12, the 3, the 6 and the 9 o'clock marks. So if I just do one, just to show you, come along the top, round the tummy seam, and then come down the back here. There we are, round the hole. And now I'm going to put on all those markings. So I've got U, L, M, and around the hole I've got 12, 3, 6, 9. So when I move my pattern piece away, I'm just going to make sure that these lines are transferred. There we go. That one, that one, that one. Oh, and that one. There we are. So that's one piece of the body prepped, and I will then turn it over and I'll do exactly the same thing again. I've put all these little markings on as well. So that's ready. So when you come to draw around your leg pieces, you will see that they've got slightly different instructions to everything else, in that they say cut 2 with a hole, 1 reversed, and then cut 2 without a hole, 1 reversed. So I've got my leg piece here and I'm going to draw around it once. There we are, and along the bottom. And this is my first line here, cut 2 with a hole, 1 reversed. So I'll draw around this circle, this will be the hole. I've also then got a mark at the top here. I've got a mark to the side,
I've got another mark to the side. So I'm going to put those on, and I've got these marks here that say 9, 12, 3, 6, and there's one at the bottom which says centre point here. So we'll put that in. Okay. Take the piece away and just transfer those markings, because otherwise they're going to get cut off when you cut out the interfacing later on. That's all 4, 3, and that one at the bottom. So because it says cut 2 with a hole 1 reversed, we're going to turn our piece over and we're going to draw around it again. So what I've done to make sure that I knew where the lines were on both sides of my pattern piece, because they are important, is I just pushed a pin through. So I've got little marks here. You probably can't see it on video, but I can see it's there, 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 and the centre point at the bottom there. And then again I'll transfer these. Okay, so referring back once more, it says cut 2 with a hole 1 reversed. So you've done both of those. You can see that they face in 2 different directions. Now we're going to do 2 without a hole 1 reversed. So let's just move the interfacing a bit along. There we are. So we're going to draw all around it again, but we're not going to do this element here. We are though going to put these marks. Okay, and then we'll turn our pattern piece over and we'll draw around it once more. And again without the hole. So we've got centre point, and then you've got the top and the 2 side marks. All of this will become clearer as you put your bear together. So don't be worrying right now why you're doing it. Just follow the instructions and it'll all become clear in a bit. Okay. So just quickly showing you this once more before we move on. Our legs cut 2 with a hole 1 reversed. You can see I've got one faces this way, one faces that way. I've drawn the holes. I've got all the marks around the outside. And then for my cut 2 without a hole, you can see one faces this way, one faces this way. And again, I've transferred those marks from the outside of the pattern pieces onto the interfacing as well. Now that I've drawn around all of my pattern pieces onto my interfacing, the next job is to iron the interfacing onto the fabric. So I have 2 different fabrics I'm using for this project. This lovely pale blue here is Makower Patchwork fabric linen texture in Dove. And the pink textured fabric here is from my mum's fabric stash. So the whole Elsie Bear project is in memory of my mum. Elsie was my mum's middle name. And my mum loved to sew, and I inherited, as well as her sewing machine, a large amount of fabric when she passed away. So some of the fabrics I use later on when I make clothes for Elsie Bear are also from my mum's fabric. So this is how we do interfacing. Turn your fabric over so the wrong side of the fabric is facing you. Lay your interfacing pieces out so that the glue side of the interfacing is against the wrong side of the fabric. So I'm just using this pink for the paws and for the inner ears, like so. So I'll take this over to my ironing board and I'll iron it, and then I'll do the same then with my Dove colour fabric. So I will get the reverse side of the fabric, I'll lay my interfacing on it, and then once it's all ironed, then I will cut out my pieces. So I only rough cut these out for now because there was no point cutting them out perfectly twice. But once these are ironed, then I'll cut them all out, and then all of my fabric pieces are all prepped and I'll be ready to start sewing. So the first thing that we're going to sew is our ears. When you look at your ear pattern piece, the dashed line shows you what you're going to sew. So you're not going to sew along this slightly curved bottom bit, you're only going to sew around here. Pop your ears into pairs. I'm using a different colour fabric for the front than I am for the back of each ear. And then place your fabrics so the right sides of fabric are together. One forward facing piece of ear, one back facing piece of ear. and then pop a few pins in to hold them together. There we are. And now it's pinned, I take it across to my sewing machine. 2 points before I start to sew. Number one is my stitch length is set to 2.0. On my machine that is a small stitch length, and you always want to sew a memory bear with a very short stitch because it will stop your stitches from either popping or from showing when you stuff your bear. Where it says select pattern here, that's about where my needle is going up and down compared with where my presser foot is. So if I just bring you across now, so I've got a clear presser foot so I can easily see my fabric as I move around the curves, and then my needle is set up so it goes up and down here, and that is 5mm away from the edge of the presser foot, which means if I have my raw edge of fabric is against the edge of this presser foot, as the needle goes up and down, I'm getting a perfect 5mm seam allowance. Now the seam allowance on this pattern says it's either 5mm or 1/4 of an inch. They're very, very, very similar measurements, so just pick whichever works for you and stick with that throughout the pattern. I've brought my pair of ear pieces across to the machine. Now what I shall do is I'm going to just pop them under the needle, under the presser foot here. Now I'm not starting right on the very edge there, I'm starting a little way in, and I'm going to put my presser foot down. And what I'm going to do before I start sewing forwards is I'm going to do a few stitches backwards, which will just go off the edge of the fabric before I sew forwards. That will secure the stitches and stop them from unravelling. Now you've got lots of curves in this pattern, and already we're at a point where it's going to be quite difficult for the needle to follow the fabric round. So what we do in this case is we pop our needle down and we lift our presser foot up, turn the fabric a little bit, put the presser foot back down and continue to sew. And then we'll do it again. So needle down, presser foot up, turn, presser foot down, and keep going like this all the way around the ear. Now that I've sewn all the way around the circumference of the ear, as shown by the dashed line on the pattern, right at the end of this line of stitching, I'm just going to slowly move my needle through the fabric till I've come off the end, and then I'm going to do some reverse stitches. There we are. So each time you sew a seam on this bear, at the beginning, start a little way in, do reverse stitches and then sew forwards, and then at the end of a line of stitching, come off the fabric and then do a few reverse stitches back. And what this does is it stops these stitches from unravelling. Now I've sewn all the way around the edge of the ear. You can see when you look at the pattern piece, it matches where the dashed line is. What I'm going to do now, I'll take the pins out first, and then I'm going to just snip at the bottom here the excess fabric away from the line of stitching, and do the same on the other side. That's also taking away those ends of thread because we don't want those to be potentially showing later on. And then I'm just going to snip all the way around, just removing that excess fabric. There we are. Next, I'm going to turn my ear through so that the right side of fabric is facing outwards. And with my stuffing tool, I use a plastic chopstick, which is perfect for stuffing. Just going to push the fabric, there we are, to make sure it's nicely curved. And then the next thing is I'm going to pop some stuffing in it. So you don't want to stuff it all the way to the edge of the fabric, because this bit here is going to be sewn into the seam between the front and back of head, but you want enough in that the ears will look nice and puffy. Maybe a bit more. just going to hold that in position with a couple of pins this side and the other side. Just push that stuff in a bit more. There we go. Okay, before I go any further though, I'm going to sew these two pieces of ear together. So exactly the same set of steps. Right sides of fabric together, a couple of pins to hold, sew it on the sewing machine. Make sure you do reverse stitching either end to secure your threads, and then snip the excess fabric away. Once you've done all of that, you are going to turn it through and then you're going to stuff it just as you did for the first ear. Once both of your ears are fully sewn, turned through and stuffed, then hand stitch the bottom along the bottom of the ears one at a time. And the reason that we do this is to stop, the ears can slip if you're not careful when you attach them in between the front and back head. So to tackle this we do two things. Number one, we sew the bottom of the ear closed, because that means that the front and back pieces of ear cannot move away from each other because they're sewn. And then what we're going to do once we finish sewing all the way along here, and it is looking like this, is we are going to stitch it onto the front of the face before we attach the front of the face to the back of the head. Next we are going to sew the face pieces together, so do not get your face pieces mixed up with your back of head pieces. Remember, the face pieces have both got the eye holes marked on, so put them together right sides of fabric facing each other, lay them exactly on top of each other, and now if you look at your pattern piece you can see by the dashed line, this is the line that we're sewing from A to B. So pop some pins in just to make sure the fabric doesn't move when it's under the machine. There we go. So we'll sew from A to B. This is what my face pieces look like once I've sewn from A to B, as shown by the pattern. Next I'm going to snip the excess fabric away from the top and the bottom of this seam line, and then I'm going to use my pinking shears, which are these scissors with a triangular blade, to cut all the way down. Be really careful you don't snip through your line of stitching. There we are. But using this zigzag edge scissor, what you do is it means that when you open your fabric up and you stuff it later on, it will allow that fabric to curve nicely without being pulled by the fabric that was here on the other side of your line of stitches. Just in case you're wondering, I'm using a pink thread here just so you can see it really clear for the video. I've used a blue on the other side, so hopefully it will disappear a bit when I put my bear together. Now that our ears are prepared and the first seam of our face is sewn, the next thing to do is to pin the ears onto the face. So if we look at our face pattern piece, you can see that there's points C and D. Now your ears need to go between C and D. So what I've done on the one side of the face is I've put a pin, one at C, one at D, just so I can show you easily how to do this. Let's move this out of the way. So when your bear is completed, the ears will sit like so, because this is the front of my ears and this is the front of my face fabric. So let's start with this ear here. So just put it forwards onto the ear. So therefore I've got my right side of my ear fabric is sitting on the right side of my face fabric. Move it around a bit so that the ear is in between these pins, which are marking C and D, and then just pin it into place. So this seam that we've just hand sewn shut is going along the raw edge of the face fabric between C and D. And there we are. If you've got thinner fabric, this all sits a bit neater. If I chose to use quite a fluffy fabric for my inner ear. So that is pinned into position. So here's the face. This was C, this was D, the ear is pinned in between. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand stitch again just along here, because that will hold this ear in. So I finished hand stitching the first ear on. I'm just thinking that this video is titled Easy Memory Bear Pattern, and you might be thinking, gosh, all this hand stitching, but this is purely to make sure that this ear doesn't move out of position. You can skip hand sewing the bottom of the ear. You can skip hand sewing it onto the face piece if you would like to. It's totally your choice. I've just done it to make sure that my finished bear is definitely nice and neat. So now I'm going to put my other ear on. So if I put my face piece back down on the table, this is my ear. I've got pins here for C and D. This is the front of my ear, and I'll just flip it forwards so that the right side of my front of ear fabric is sitting against the right side of my face fabric. And again, I'm going to pin and then hand stitch this area. I've now sewn both ears onto my face pieces. I'm now going to put this to one side for a minute. We'll put the eyes in later. And here are our back of head pieces. Now if we look at our pattern piece, you can see there's E and there's F. The dashed line is showing where we're sewing. We're not doing the whole thing. If we just do the top, it makes it easier later on when we put the head inside the body and sew along the neck seam. So put this here, lay these exactly on top of each other, just like we did when we did the face. And now we can put a pin here at F and another pin at the top by E, and I'm just going to sew from the top down to where my yellow pin is here. Just as we did when we sewed the face pieces together, we're going to start a few millimeters in from the end of the piece of fabric. We'll do a few reverse stitches. And I'm now going to sew forwards all the way to the yellow pin which marks point F, and then I'll do a couple of reverse stitches to secure. All done. Now that I've sewn from E to F, I'm going to take my pins out. I'm going to snip the excess fabric away from the seam allowance here at point E. Okay, and I do that because it means that when we put the back of head onto the face, we haven't got such a big bump of fabric here to go through. Next, we are going to open up our back of head pieces like so. So our right side of fabric's facing upwards. We'll open up our face piece with our ears stitched in like so. I'm going to take these pins out the way now. This stuffing should hold into position easily enough because it's been pinned for a while. I'm going to turn my face over so the right side of the face fabric is on the right side of the back of head fabric. I'm going to put a pin here to join E to A. There we are. And then I'm going to put a pin down here which is joining G to H. There we are, and turn it and one the other side, which pins G to H, like so. And now I'm going to just continue to pin all the way along the side seams. So we're going GH all the way up to EA and keep pinning it all the way around to GH here. This is all fully pinned now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sew this together. Now instead of sewing from here and going all the way around to here, I'm going to start from the centre and sew down to the side, and then I will stop and then I'll come back to the centre and sew down to the side. By sewing it in two separate pieces, it stops you getting a wonky ear where the machine moves up and down through the thicker layers of fabric. So sew from central down to side, central down to side. Now I've sewn all the way around, I'm going to take out all my pins, and then at the bottom of each of the two corners I'm just going to snip away the excess fabric. Oops. And I'll do the same the other side, and that will just mean that when I put my head onto my body I haven't got such a big bump of fabric to sew through, so my seam will be straighter. So my next step is to put in my craft eyes. So this is the face piece here, and you can see the dots where the eyes are. So if I put my hand inside, there we are, and then I'm just going to do a little snip top to bottom of my dot, and then put my scissors in and do a little snip this way, and a little snip in the other direction. There we are. So now if I turn the face through, I can push the point of the eye through this hole I've just made, turning back through as I go. There we are. And then just push the back on. There we are. That's one eye put in, and then repeat for the other eye. As well as snipping the fabric at the bottom of the side seams of the head, you also want to get your pinking shears and just trim all the way around that side seam. Be really careful that you are not snipping through your seam, so you don't end up with a hole in your bear's head that will leak stuffing later on. Just go all the way around, and that will let your bear's head be beautifully curved once you turn it through. Now I've got both eyes in, my bear's head is complete. I'm going to stitch the nose on at the end after I've sewn my bear. So for our Elsie Bear's arms, you will notice my pattern piece says cut 2, 1 reversed. It was an error. I've corrected it on the pattern piece that you'll have in your pattern, and yours will say cut 4, 2 reversed. But you will notice that there's a dashed line runs from I here and around, and then it says stuffing gap, and then the dashed line goes up to J. This stuffing gap here, to make it easier to stitch it closed later on in the process, what I've done on my pattern pieces is I've sewn a line of guide stitches on each of my 4 arm pieces. These guide stitches, as you can see, have not sewn the bear's arms together. All they are is a line of stitches exactly the same distance from my raw edge of fabric that my other seams are, and they're just there to help me do a really decent job later on when I sew my bear's arms closed post stuffing. Now we are going to sew our bear's arms into pairs. So lay them so that the stuffing gap stitches of one arm are above the stuffing gap stitches of another arm. There we are. And then if we return to our pattern piece, remember we've got an I and a J, so pop a pin in by point J. Just move this pin here so that it goes through both layers, and then if I just move this pin so it goes through both layers too, and I'm going to put a pin in by I. There we are, and I'm just going to pin all the way around here. I have now pinned all the way around, and just to make it clearer for you, I've put a yellow pin at the top and bottom here of the stuffing gap. So what I'm going to do, let's bring my pattern piece across, is I shall sew from J down to this first yellow pin, and then I'll stop sewing and I'll start again here from this yellow pin, and I'll sew all the way around up to here, which is I. Now that I have sewn all the way around, because I've used the pink thread, you can see how my sewing line mirrors the pattern piece, and here this is the stuffing gap, and so you can see there's the gap and it's lined with my guide stitches, so I'll be able to easily sew that up later on. The next thing to do with the arm is to get your pinking shears again and cut around all of the curves, because then when you turn your arm through you get a nicely curved arm. Okay, and once you've finished with your pinking shears, make sure you don't go through your line of stitches. Repeat the same process, sewing from I to J and then cutting around with pinking shears for the other arm. So our arms are now sewn. We've got two arms both sewn into pairs. We've got our stuffing gaps have got guide stitches on them to make them nice and easy to stitch up later on in the process, and we've cut around the edge with our pinking shears so those will be nice and curved when we turn them through. And next I'm going to show you how to sew your bear's legs and body. Next we are going to sew our bear's inner leg, which is on with the hole in, to our bear's body. So this is what we need to do. This sounds complex, but just listen carefully, follow the stages, it will be fine. So it's a bit hard to see unfortunately on this fabric, but this is the right side of my bear's body. It's blue, and this is the wrong side of my bear's body, which is white, but they're not overly different in colour. If I just turn it, you can see that's the bluer side, that's the right side, this is the wrong side of fabric. So I'm going to lay my bear's leg onto my bear's body, like so. Now you'll be able to see here that I've got coloured pins here, and if I just run you through using the pattern pieces, I've got a red pin in the number 12, and I've got a green pin in the number 3, I've got an orange pin in the number 6, and I've got a blue pin in the number 9, and I did that for both the body piece and the leg piece. So this is a standing bear, so our leg is in line with our body, same as yours would be if you were to stand up. So you want to just make sure that the two holes are exactly overlapping each other, and each of these 4 pins are again exactly overlapping each other, so your bear will stand up nice and straight. So we'll just remove one of these pins out of the way and push this one then so it goes through 2 layers of fabric, both layers of fabric. Let's turn this around a little and remove one pin and push this pin so it goes straight through. Turn it again, remove one, there we are, and turn it once more, there we are. Let's pull this into position a bit, it's a bit better, and put another pin here. Okay, and now we're going to put a pin in between each of those pins. There we go, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Before we take this over to the sewing machine, just double check yourself, okay? So you've got 12, 3, 6, 9, 12, 3, 6, 9. Make sure that your right side of your bear's inner leg is sitting against the right side of your bear's body, and make sure that the toe is directly below N of your pattern piece. Okay, so P is what we've marked the toe as on the pattern piece, and N here, this is the corner of where it's going to join the tummy later. So just double check that your bear will be in the correct position, standing up with its foot facing in the right direction. When we sew our inner leg onto our bear's body, we are going to use the same size seam allowance that we've used all the way around our bear. Now remember that my needle is entering my fabric on my setup 5mm from the edge of my the raw edge of my fabric. So make sure yours is the same, or if you're doing 1/4 inch seam allowance, make sure it's the same. So the edge of my presser foot is against the raw edge here of the hole, and then I'm just going to very slowly and carefully sew around. Now we're obviously sewing around a circle here, so there's going to be a lot of putting the needle down, lifting the foot, pivoting the fabric, pop the foot back down, a few more stitches, etc. Now, I won't sew all the way around this right now, I'll do it off camera, but what I want you to do is when you're doing your line of stitches that's going all the way around the hole, make sure that the end of your line slightly overlaps with the beginning of your line. If you leave a gap there, then you're going to have an area where stuffing will leak out later on. So just keep sewing all the way around, take your time, just keep pivoting that fabric. Keep that line of stitches as nice and neat and circular as you can, but make sure when you end this line of stitches that it does overlap with where you began your line of stitches. I've sewn all the way around the hole now and my stitches are overlapped, so you can see that that is a perfect circle all the way around. What I need to do next is to get my scissors and just snip. You won't be able to do this curve using your pinking shears, so instead we're just going to snip all the way around at sort of 5mm, 1/4 inch type intervals. Make sure you don't cut through your line of stitching. This is just to make sure that when you stuff your bear, this curve looks really good and it's not pulling awkwardly out of shape. And then once you've gone all the way around there doing your little snips, repeat exactly the same process for your other inner leg and your other body piece. Just as you did before, take your time, make sure you've lined up number 12 with number 12, number 6 with number 6, etc. and make sure your right side of fabrics are together as mine are. Okay? Next you need to sew a line of guide stitches from K to L. On your pattern piece it does say stuffing gap with some arrows, but I haven't put it on this piece that I'm using here. So I've done this one and then I'm just going to do this one as well. Once you've put your guide stitches on both pieces, then your next job is to sew the two body pieces together from N to M. So you need to fold your leg up out the way. Let's just check if that's right. Yes. So we're sewing round as far as M. If I just pop a pin here. And then your other body piece. So put them right sides to right sides. And make sure the legs are folded out the way because you don't want to catch them in the seam. I'm just going to turn it round so I can pin it easily. And we're not sewing all the way up the back, because if we leave this, the majority of the back open for now, it's going to make it much easier to do the legs and then to sew the head and the arms onto the body later on. Okay, so now we're going to sew from here round to here, and just as we've been doing on other seams, we're going to cut the excess fabric away from here just to make sewing the tummy piece on easier. The tummy's going to come in here in a bit. So now we've just sewn this seam here, and if we take a couple of pins away on the end here, we'll snip away the excess fabric. There we go. Before we go any further with our legs, just want you to double check whether you've transferred these markings that are around the outside of the top of the leg and the marking here that says centre point on the paw seam line. Just check that you've transferred those markings onto your piece of fabric. And then for your two outer leg pieces, those are the ones that didn't have holes in. Just check that you've also got the markings on those, because that's going to help you to attach your inner and outer legs together more efficiently. Now we are going to turn this, push this inner leg here through the hole and then pin the outer leg onto it. So hold your bear so that the right side of the fabric here is facing upwards towards you, and this is the wrong side of the fabric here of your inner leg. You're going to push this, just one, through this hole here and turn it all the way through. Get the extra bits that may not follow through quite so easily after you've pushed the foot. Get the whole thing through. Straighten it all out. Right, there we are. Now what we're going to do next is we're going to pin one of our outer leg pieces onto this inner leg piece. So this is our right side of our fabric now, of our leg, which is facing upwards. This is the right side of my fabric of my outer leg now. So I'm going to put the two right sides of fabric together, and I'm going to put a pin here in the toe, which is P on your pattern piece. And then I'm going to come up to this marking that I put here on the front of the side of the curve. I'll tell you what I'll do. Let's just, if I put a pin to show where my marking was on my inner leg, I can then line it up nicely. There we are. We'll do the same at the top. And the same round on the back of the leg as well. Okay, and I'm just going to pop one more pin on the heel, which is O on your pattern piece. There we are. So if I just turn it round, there we are. You can see I've just pinned 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points for now. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to put pins all the way around in between each of these and just make sure that my fabric is sitting nicely together. It will do, because they're the same shape. It should be quite straightforward, that element. And then if we just look on the pattern piece, you will be sewing from O, and you're following the dashed line, so you're sewing all the way around the outside to P. Okay, normal size seam allowance here, just using either 5mm or 1/4 inch. So from O and around to P after you've pinned, and then I'll show you the next step. Before I go across to the sewing machine, I just wanted to show you my inner and outer legs are now fully pinned together, and now they're ready to be sewn. Once you've sewn all the way around your leg, what you need to do next is trim away the excess fabric from by the heel and by the toe, because this will mean when you sew your paw pad on, it will be easier to get a nice straight line. And then get your pinking shears and just cut around all of the curves of the leg. And once you've cut all the way around all the curve bits, then repeat these steps for the other inner leg and outer leg. So I'm just showing you on the second leg in case you were a little bit confused with the first one. So this is the right side of my bear's body, the right side of my fabric, and I'm going to push the inner leg through the hole, like so, and turn it so that it's, there we are. So now what I'm looking at is my right side of my leg fabric and my wrong side of my bear's body fabric here. And if I just pop some pins where those markings were, one at the top and one at either side, there it is, and down the other side, there we are. And then I'll lay my leg on and pin all the way around. go, just pin the toe, and then so once you've got those in position, then add all your additional pins in between to secure your fabric, sew it on your sewing machine, and then clip the excess fabric away from the heel and the toe and snip round with your pinking shears to make sure the leg curves nicely once you stuff it. Before we start attaching our first bear's paw to our leg, just looking back at the pattern pieces, you'll see that the top is marked toe and the bottom is marked heel, and you've got centre point here, and then if you look at your bear's leg, you've got O, centre point and P. So obviously you can think of this as being like the shape of a human foot, and that would be the toe. So we are basically on our fabric going to pin the toe of the paw to P, the heel to O, and the centre points either side, and then we'll just pop pins in between. So here is the first of my bear's legs that needs a paw sewn to it, and I've written toe on my paw pattern piece because the pattern piece isn't round, it's oval, and you don't want to accidentally pin the wrong bit. Okay, so there's my pins. Hold your bear's leg open. So we are pinning right sides of fabrics together. So this is the right side of my bear's leg, and this is the right side of my bear's paw pad. So pin the toe onto point P of your bear's leg and turn it a bit. Let's pop a pin on the centre point here so we can see where it is, and then pin the centre point of the paw pad to that. There we are. Turn it again, and here's our heel seam, which is O, so pin those together and just turn it once more, and you've got your centre point, centre point of the leg here and centre point of the paw pad here. There we are. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go all the way around between these first 4 pins we've put in, and we are going to pin our bear's paw through to its legs. Now if you've seen any of my other patterns, you'll know what I'm going to say next. So I'm doing this first stage by pinning downwards into my bear's paw pad like so, and my pins are, I don't know, about a centimetre apart maybe. You can have your pins apart as far away as you like, but I want to make sure that I haven't got any gapes or wrong bits in my fabric, because those will really show up if you get it wrong now. So you want to make this nice and accurate. There we are. Now imagine that I've pinned all the way around here. What I shall do as my second step before I sew is I'm going to turn it over, and I'm going to put a pin in between each of my first row of pins, but this time round I'm pinning from my leg downwards into my paw pad. So what this is doing is it's making sure that when you sew your bear's paw onto your bear's leg, that the raw edges of the fabric are correctly together all the way around, and therefore your bear's paw will have a really nice, I don't know how to say it, sort of a nice appearance. It'll be nice and round. There won't be any wrinkles or bumps or puckers. It will just be really nice and neat. There we go. So off camera now, I'm just going to finish pinning all the way around here, and this time I shall be pinning from the paw downwards through into the leg. After I've done that row of pins, I'm then going to flip it over, and I shall pin in between each of my first set of pins by pinning from the leg down into the paw. Now my bear's paw is pinned onto my bear's leg all the way around. As you can see, there's a huge amount of pins, but that is fine because it means that it's holding the paw really nicely against the leg. So pop it under your presser foot. There we are. Put your presser foot down, put your needle down into your fabric. Now, you might have just noticed, but I have put this paw and leg paw side down onto the machine. That helps to make sure that you've got a really nice smooth line around the edge of your paw. And then I'm just going to sew really slowly all the way around. So I'm using exactly the same seam allowance as I've used elsewhere on my bear, so 5mm or 1/4 inch. And I'm just using the edge of my presser foot here, and I'm keeping it against the edge of my fabric. Now, because you've got quite a rounded shape here, you are going to have to do a lot of popping your needle down, moving your foot, sewing a little more, needle down, pivot your fabric, foot down, sew on. So just keep going all the way around. One more point before I just carry on sewing this leg is just to say that remember how when we sewed the legs onto the body and we made sure that our seams overlapped? Do the same now when you're doing your paw onto your leg. So make sure that the seam that you're sewing just slightly overlaps with where you started from. I've taken all my pins out now, and you can see from where my threads are that my seam that was around the outside edge of my paw has slightly overlapped there by about 5mm. Doesn't matter how far you overlap by, just as long as you definitely have. Now what I'm going to do, I'll just turn it over and I'm going to use my pinking shears, and I'm just going to cut all the way around as before. Careful not to cut through your line of stitching. There we are. And then I'm going to sew my second paw on. Now that I have pinned my second paw pad, I'm going to sew it, and so as I did before, I'll lay it paw side down onto my sewing machine and lift up my needle, put my presser foot onto my fabric, and I'm just going to sew around slowly and carefully, and then once I've removed all my pins, I will clip the curves with my pinking shears. Now that you've sewn your bear's paw pads, your bear's body and leg will look like so. The next step is to attach the body to the tummy. So if I just show you using the pattern pieces, push these to one side, we are sewing Q at the bottom of the tummy onto N here of the body, and we're going to sew R to S both sides. So, and then see where this dashed line is? This is where we are sewing the tummy here onto the tummy seam. So what you need to do is open your bear's body up. Make sure at this point you've got the right bit, so you're not attaching anything to this piece here with the guide stitches. You're attaching first of all onto this central seam here. So let's get a pin and the tummy piece. So turn your tummy over and lay the mark that you've got, which is Q, onto the central seam there of the body, which is marked as N. And then the top of the tummy, which on your pattern piece is R, needs to be pinned onto your body at S. Pin both sides. There we go, that's RS to RS. And now put multiple pins in between. If your fabric doesn't immediately line up, then remove a couple of pins and ease it through. So you can see on the tummy piece there's a dashed line that runs from R to Q and up to R, and this is where I've pinned all the way around. There's no pins across this top bit here that's marked neck seam on your pattern, because that's where we'll be sewing the head in a bit. So now just take this across to the sewing machine and you're going to sew from here all the way around to here. So I have brought my bear's tummy and body across to the machine, and now I'm sewing from SR one side of the tummy and body round to QN and then up to RS. So off we go. This isn't a really sharply curved piece, but it is. It will need a few times of popping your needle down and pivoting your fabric a bit, just to keep the seam nice and even. Once your bear's tummy is fully sewn into position, cut the excess fabric away at the top of each side of the tummy and then trim all the way around with your pinking shears, like so. Once you've sewn all the way around the tummy seam, the next job is to put the pins where your markings are for T and U. So between T and U on either side is where we're going to place our bear's arms. So there's one here, and there's one here, and we'll just put the last one in here. There we go. And next I'm going to turn my bear's arms so the right side of fabric is facing outwards. Once you've turned your arms through so the right side of fabric is facing outwards, just run your chopstick round just to make sure the curve is nicely pushed out around the sort of hand part of your bear's arm. And now if we look at our bear's body, we've got these pins which are at S and U, this side and this side. Let's turn our bear's body so the right side of fabric is facing us. Just push this tummy out so you can see a bit better how the bear's body will be showing once it's all stuffed. Now we need to be careful how we place these arms to make sure they're round the right way. So pop your arm so the raw edge of the arm is where the raw edge of the neck seam is. You need to make sure the guide stitches on the back of your bear are facing the guide stitches on the arm of your bear. That way the side that hasn't got a ladder stitch, once you've closed it up, will be facing forwards. Okay, so let's just do that again. The guide stitch at the back of the bear's arm needs to face the guide stitch at the back of the bear's body. So just hold your arm like this, turn your bear over, and then we're just going to wriggle this into position and pin. There we are. So the top of my arm is fractionally above the neck seam to make sure that when I do sew my bear's head and body together, the arm will definitely be caught in the seam. There we are, just turn it over. Yeah, that'll be fine. And then do the same for your other arm. Because my bear's arm fabric wanted to sort of flop forwards and I thought I wasn't going to get a decent seam, I have put some pins from one side as well as from the other side to make sure I'm not going to miss a bit of fabric when I sew. Now I've brought the bear's body with the arms pinned in over to my machine. I'm going to sew a little seam now to hold these arms in position. I'm not sewing with my edge of the presser foot right against the edge of the fabric, because I'm just doing a little sort of 2 or 3 mil from the top of the fabric seam. So this is just a seam just to hold that arm into position so it doesn't slip when I sew the head on. And this seam we're doing now, we want it to be less than our normal seam allowance, so it'll be hidden when we sew the bear's head to the bear's body. There we are. So it's just a seam purely to hold that arm into position there. Our bear's arms are stitched into position now with these narrow little hems of about 3mm or so. These stitches that I've done are not particularly neat, but they will be hidden out of view in the next seam. And next, on our central point of our bear's tummy here, we are going to put a pin. And then currently we're looking at the wrong side of the bear's fabric. Let's turn it over so the right side is facing upwards. So this is the right side of fabric here, and the neck seam is facing away from us. We'll just look at our pattern pieces again for a minute. So this is our bear's face pattern piece, and this seam that runs from A down to B is the central seam at the front of the bear's face, and you can see on our tummy we've got the centre point. So when we pin our bear's face to our tummy, we're pinning B to the centre point. Now if we look at the back of our bear's head and our bear's body, this is the central back seam of the head, and at the bottom of that is V, and we will be pinning V onto K, which is at the top of your row of guide stitches. So let's move our pattern pieces out the way. I'm holding my bear's body so that the right side of fabric is facing upwards, and I've got that pin in the central point of the tummy. And if I just put that to one side a moment and get my bear's head, so my bear's head has the right side of fabric facing outwards, and I'm going to turn it so again the neck seam is facing away from me. Now bring the body back, and remember we are pinning the central point at the bottom of our bear's face, which is B, onto the central point of the tummy. So there we are, pop your pin through there. And then on the side of the bear's head piece, the side of the bear's body piece, we are going to put another pin. So this is pinning V to K. There we are. And then open the head up like so, come across, and again we're pinning V of the head onto the K that's at the top of your bear's body. And now, I know there's an arm in between, but you can see where the seam is here on the body. Pop a pin in so you can see it nice and clearly. Turn it over and line up this seam here. That's the side seam of your bear's face. There we are. Do the same the other side. So find that seam on the side of your bear's body and pop a pin, and then on your bear's head, there's the seam, line it all up, move the pin, brilliant. Oh, I've missed, let's pop it in again. There we are. And now we are going to pin the head to the body all the way along the neck seam. So there are a few little curves in this where the head and the body are curving in slightly different directions, so just make sure your raw edges of fabric meet up nicely before you put your pins through. And just pin all the way along. Once you have pinned all the way along your neck seam, pop it under the foot of your sewing machine. Make sure you do a couple of reverse stitches to start, and then sew all the way along. And once you get to the end of that neck seam, just do a couple of reverse stitches to start to finish. So go off the end and then reverse. There we go. I've now sewn the whole neck seam, and then either end I've just snipped away the excess fabric from the ends of the seam. There's no need to cut along this seam with pinking shears because it is relatively straight. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to sew the back of our bear's head closed. So if I just show you the pattern piece, we are sewing from F down to V. So on our bear, let's turn the head so it's inside out and straighten it out a little bit. Turn it to the side. Now we're going to put a pin at the where the neck seams are. So this is V on our back of headpiece, and our seam that we sewed here, the top of the back of head here, finished at point F. So pop a pin there as well, and then pin all the way down from F to V. If you can hear a noise in the background, it is rain and my dog snoring, so quite a lot of background noise in this room right now, sorry. There we are. One more. So I'm going to take this across to the sewing machine and sew down there, and then we'll do our final seam. So this is the seam at the back of my bear's head. So the bear's head is fully sewn all the way down to the neck seam here. And now if I just flip my bear's body over, you can then see it in comparison to the pattern piece. So here's my bear's body, and we sewed earlier up to M, and we sewed guide stitches from K to L. So this last seam that we're sewing is from L around to M. Okay, so we're leaving a nice big turning and stuffing gap here, so it's really easy for you to turn your bear through that gap. So yep, pin and then sew. Now I have pinned all the way up the bear's body, but I've left this bit that we guide stitched earlier unpinned because I'm not sewing through there. So on your bear's body it's M up to L that you are pinning now, and then you're just going to take this across to the sewing machine, and that's my final seam that I'm sewing with the machine. This final seam is now fully sewn, and I'm going to turn my bear through the turning and stuffing gap. So if I put my fingers in, see what I can grab first. An ear, let's pull an ear upwards. There we are. And just turn it all through. And you've got your arms to come. This bit is a bit fiddly. Now your bear is fully turned through, just double check that the arms are definitely 100% caught in that neck seam, that there isn't any open bits of fabric hanging down or anything, but those are fine. And what you're going to do now is stuff your bear. Now stuffing can take quite a while, and you need to do it pretty much slowly and carefully, otherwise all your hard work that you've put in so far will go to waste. If you just push in big lumps of stuffing, your bear is going to look lumpy. So get bits sort of this sort of a size, and with your stuffing tool you want to really push that stuffing down hard into the extremities and then gradually fill the bear up with stuffing. So go in through the seam at the back of the neck, obviously, push the stuffing down into the feet and really pack it in. Make sure that all of these curves at the base of your bear's feet are really rounded out with stuffing, that are really firm, and then come up the legs. Make sure that the bits, the tops of the legs are all nicely filled out with stuffing as well. Same for the body. Make sure the head's nicely filled. Make sure that the nose in particular is pushed out properly so that your bear's face is really nicely rounded out. And then once you've stuffed all of your bear, then the next job will be to ladder stitch the bear's body shut. I'll show you that in a second, but just to say, you're going to stuff your bear's arms last. It's really important when you do the arms, they sit properly against the sides of your bear's body and that they don't sort of poke out at a funny angle. And the way you want to get this done is to do the stuffing of the bear's body and head, and do that ladder stitch first and then do your bear's arms. Now that our bear's body and legs and head are all stuffed, the next thing to do is to ladder stitch the back closed. So let me just pop the needle out of the way there. A ladder stitch, when done correctly, literally looks like a ladder. we've got our guide stitches either side. So they're like the upright struts of a ladder. And what we're going to do with our thread is we are going to basically draw the rungs of the ladder across these two guide stitches. So I don't know whether that made sense, but here is my thread, and these are my uprights, remember. So my thread, I need to be drawing across patterns. So I shall go across and up and across and up and across and up to get a ladder stitch that really disappears into the fabric either side of the stuffing hole, so that when you pull your threads tight, it should be almost invisible. The secret to that is to make sure that your threads are at a really good right angle. Your across threads are a really good right angle to your upright threads. Okay, and make sure as you're putting these stitches in now, if you use a little needle, it does help you to do little stitches. And the stitches that you do on either side of the hole, make sure they're just on the outside of your row of guide stitches, not too far out, just next to it so that they'll disappear. I'm using a pink thread. Once I've shown you this technique, just so that my bear looks as perfect as I can get it, I will be taking these stitches out and redoing with a pale blue so it matches in with my bear's body. But for now, this is where we are. So here is my thread, and I am going to hold the thread here to work out where would be a good place to put my needle. Pop my needle in, so just on the outside of my guide thread, and dip it down and up, pull it through, hold my thread across the stuffing gap again so I can see where I'm going to go, and now I'm going to go down and up, hold my thread across again. I'm just holding the thread across just to show myself where I'm going. I'm not going to, my stitch is not going through this across piece of thread. And I'm going to go in here, get this bit of thread out of the way. I'm going to go here. There we are. And that's wonky. So I'm going to take that one out because I don't want it to be wonky. This is because I was trying to demonstrate about the threads. There we are. Re-threaded needle, so across. So I can see my needle actually needs to go in about here in order to not be wonky. Let's move this thread out of the way. Down and up. Hold it across. Going in here, down and up. And I'm going across. There's my marker. Oh, it's really difficult doing the ones on the right hand side. The left is easy, the right isn't because I'm right-handed. Down and up. Go across. Down and up. And come across, down and up. So now that I've got this far, can you see what I mean about the right angles? So this now looks like a ladder, doesn't it? You've got your two uprights of your ladder and you are creating horizontal stitches that go across. So with every single thread, hold your piece of cotton across to get a marker, dip down through the fabric, come back out, hold your thread across and dip down and come out, hold your thread across, dip down. Okay, now as I said, because I want my stitches to completely disappear, I will be taking these out in a bit and putting in a blue thread that perfectly matches my fabric. But imagine I'd sewn all the way to the top. What I would then do is I'd turn my bear round the other way, so it's a bit easier for me to pull at the threads. And with my embroidery scissors closed, just so I've got this really nice thin point here, I would pull up each rung of the ladder until the two open sides of fabric are next to each other. And if I just pull up these threads I've done so far, you will be able to see. Watch if you've got any bits of stuffing poking through, that they are pushed back in so they don't mess up your work. Okay, so can you see how this has more or less disappeared? It's still showing. This one's showing extra because it's pink, but it doesn't show massively. And you can always put a little bit of a something over the back if you've maybe got some buttons you wanted to stitch on or something else, just to hide if your stitches are not perfect. But I'm now going to take this pink thread out and I'm going to redo this ladder stitch with the pale blue. I have taken out the pink thread and I have replaced it with a very pale blue. So I used this cotton, which is very similar in tone to my bear's body. And as you can see where the difference in stitching is, but the ladder stitching itself is quite small. It is quite minimal really. So the next stage of making our bear is to stuff the two arms. Now what you want to do when you stuff your arms is put a lot of stuffing into the paw end of the arm, but then as you come up towards the neck, put in less so that the arms, because if you completely stuff both arms, they're going to end up sticking out like this, like wings. So really stuff the paws hard and then gently put in less and less stuffing as you come towards the top. And as you go, keep stopping and just check whether you're happy with how your bear's arms are sitting. Okay, I've stuffed my Elsie Bear's arms and you can see from the front that there's a lot more stuffing at the bottom here than there is at the top, and the arms are just resting gently against the legs. And if I turn her to the side, you can see the paw is really quite firm, but the top here there's a lot less stuffing. Next I'm going to ladder stitch the two backs of the arms up, and then I'll just show you how to sew on the felt nose and your Elsie Bear will be complete. I've now stitched the backs of both arms up as well as the back of the back up, so all my ladder stitches are complete. And now I just need to put my felt nose onto my bear. So if I look at the front of her face, there is a bulge here, and if I turn her sideways, look at where that bulge starts, or where the peak of it is. Somewhere in between the sort of peak of it and the start, around here. Pop a pin. There we are. Lay the bear down on her back and put your felt nose, which just sits against that pin, and put in a couple of pins, one either side, just so you can check and see whether it looks okay. Remove this one. Yeah, I think that looks good in terms of position. So yeah, look for where the beginning of this bulge is and just work out, pop a pin and then stick your nose, pop a couple of pins just to be sure. Once you're happy with the position, let's sew it on. To stitch my bear's nose on, I'm just doing almost like a little ladder stitch. So I'm going down and up in the fabric of the face, and then down and up through the felt, and I'll just keep going like that all the way around. I've used a cotton that matches the nose felt, so hopefully these stitches will pretty much disappear when I've finished. And there we are, the nose is fully sewn on. Your easy teddy bear, Elsie Bear, is now complete. I really hope you found this video tutorial helpful, and if you have, please can you like this video? If you subscribe to my channel, you'll see more of my videos and tutorials as I publish them. Thank you so much for watching.